Birdman is one of the most talked about films of the year. After watching Birdman, a common reaction people have is, what was going on, what was real, and what was in his head? In this video, I want to give my interpretation of what happened and why I think this explanation makes the most sense. For some films, I think there are correct interpretations and wrong interpretations, especially if we can get more information from the director. In this case though, I wasn't able to find a definitive explanation from the director, so I have to assume it was left intentionally ambiguous and open to different opinions. Once again, this is my own analysis, and I think other views have support as well. Warning, the following video contains heavy spoilers. In case you haven't seen the film and still want to listen, here's a brief synopsis. Michael Keaton plays Regan Thompson, a washed-up actor trying to revitalize his career by leading a play, all the while being tormented by Birdman, the character that brought him fame. He also seems to have psychic powers and is able to move things with his mind. An ensemble cast of equally flawed characters go in and out of his world while he's dealing with his issues. So what do I think is going on? I believe the whole film, save for a few scenes, are all happening in Regan Thompson's mind. Now I know that might sound like an easy answer. The "it was all a dream" explanation can feel like a cop-out or a way to not actually explain anything. But in this case, I think it's the explanation that actually respects and elevates this film into one of the best representations of a dream I've seen. Much better than Inception, which was a great movie, but not really what dreams are like. Also, I think this is the most satisfying explanation if we assume that the details in the film were placed by the director for a reason and not just to intentionally confuse us. First off, a little background on the director. Birdman is directed by Alejandro Innaritu, who's known for much darker films such as 21 Grams, Babel, and Beautiful. After doing a series of such serious and heavy stories, he decided he wanted to do something more lighthearted and wrote Birdman. In an interview, he stated he wanted to do a film about mediocrity and how we deal with our limitations, something he relates to. He also states that all of the characters are very close to me internally or physically. I can relate to all of them. So here in an interview, he admits that all of these characters aren't just made from scratch. They are manifestations of things he feels. In the same interview, he says while doing this film about a play, he felt himself becoming like Regan, dealing with the very same insecurities and possibilities of failure regarding his own film. It's very meta. This isn't the best evidence that he intended the film to be all in Regan's head, but seeing as this was the tone in which this film was created under, I think it's relevant to my theory. Now onto the film itself. There are 3 reasons why I think most of this film is in Regan Thompson's head. Number 1, the way this movie was shot. Number 2, the common dream motifs. And number 3, select key scenes. I will go through them in rough chronological order of the story, but bear with me because I think the last point is the strongest and pulls all the strands together. The first is the way this film is shot. The illusion of the one continuous take reminds me of how dreams are, a stream of consciousness that doesn't always make logical sense. The scenes meld together, and the inconsistent passage of time within the film doesn't exist in the real world, but makes more sense in the context of a dream. When we are traveling through the hallways, we glide at very different speeds. Sometimes it is fast, but oftentimes it is very slow. Just like in a dream, when you are unable to move fast, especially when you're feeling anxiousness or fear. Characters also just kind of appear very suddenly and have very intense conversations with Regan. In dreams, people also just appear, especially if you've been thinking about them. Things can get intense and weird fast. Regan's interaction with his mistress sticks out. Their conversation when she tells him she's pregnant is very bizarre. I don't think her just being emotional is an adequate explanation. She ends it by gliding away and says, "Here we go." As quickly as she came, she disappears. We're left completely baffled, just like Regan. It's a very confusing interaction, and I think it supports the dream theory, because there are moments when you're just confused when you're dreaming. You could argue that this is just the style the director wanted to shoot in, and that's a fair point, but my second reason goes more into the content. The second reason I think everything is a dream is the multiple dream motifs that are used. For example, he's worried one of the actors isn't very good and wishes he'd go away. Then a light falls down and kills the actor. That scene is very jarring and almost comical, but Rickon insists that he made it happen with his psychic powers. Now, if this actually happened, his statement could be him feeling guilty about wanting to get rid of the actor, but this event makes more sense if he's lucid dreaming. All of his powers are things people experience when they dream. The telekinesis and the flying are especially common abilities people attain. Another dream motif in the film is very well known. It's the idea of going to class and finding out you are naked the whole time in front of your peers. Rickon Thompson somehow gets locked out of the building and has to wander through Times Square only in his underwear. Again, it's possible this actually happens, but what occurs after the incident seems more unlikely. Somehow his walking around the city in his underwear results in the public loving him again. This is the second time where something he's wanted very badly has happened, despite all odds. His first wish was to get rid of the actor, his second wish was for the public to love him, and they both come true. There's that scene where two of the actresses just begin making out, another common fantasy a man might have while they are dreaming. A counterpoint would be yes, these incidents might be implausible, but that doesn't mean they are impossible. Another fair point, but on to my last and strongest reason for believing this is all a dream. I will need to take us back to the beginning of the film, but first let's start towards the end. Right before the show's premiere, he tells his wife a story of how shortly after he cheated on her, he decided he didn't want to live anymore and attempts to commit suicide by walking into the ocean. But in his story, he doesn't die. The sting of the jellyfish saved him. In the beginning title scenes, right after the word Birdman flashes across the screen, for a split second, the image of an ocean with jellyfish beached along the shore appears. It's just long enough for you to see it, but short enough that it's easy to forget. The first words we hear Rickon say is, "How did we end up here?" I believe Rickon Thompson is still on the beach, having unsuccessfully tried to commit suicide, and the whole film is a product of his mind. Him saying, "How did we end up here?" refers to both his dissatisfaction with his career, but also refers to the circumstances that led him to the beach trying to kill himself. Back in the dream world, he goes on stage and shoots himself in the face. After this happens, we see a variety of bizarre images. The most surreal scene is the eclectic mix of characters that appear on stage, including jugglers, mimes, and even Spider-Man. The random characters that have no relation to each other seem to support the dream theory. But more importantly, after the freak show, we see the ocean and the jellyfish again, this time for much longer. This scene is the key to the whole mystery. What happened was, he walked into the ocean attempting to commit suicide, but he didn't die because, like the story he told, the jellyfish managed to shock him awake, and that shock manifests in his mind as the shot from the pistol on stage. The brief glimpse of the beach we get towards the end is the actual and only reality. Everything else is in his head, but since in the real world he just almost drowned, he immediately falls back into unconsciousness after the sting, and this explains the only cut in the film, which is him being briefly brought back to the real world. This also explains why the ending of the film is so optimistic. He subconsciously realizes he's still alive and will get a second chance, so his psyche and all the characters he's created treat him better. So those were the main reasons why I think this was all a dream. Another popular interpretation is that the powers in flying are hallucinated, but for the most part everything is real until he shoots himself in the face, because the way everything comes together for him in the end is obviously implausible. There is support that this might be true, but people again forget about the conversation he has with his wife right before he goes on stage. She comes in and immediately starts gushing about how great he is. The last time they interacted, it wasn't nearly as nice, and we know their relationship isn't the best. Again, in dreams you can control the narrative, and his wife appearing right before the show and telling him how great he is seems unlikely to happen in the real world. One thing I was unsure of is the fireball or comet that we see shooting across the sky a couple of times. At first I thought maybe it was him flying at high speeds. Later, after coming up with this analysis, I think maybe the comet represents his suicide, because if he does decide to kill himself, it would mean the end of the world for everyone that we see on screen, since they only exist in his mind. Or maybe the comet is just there to throw us off. This is one thing I'd love to hear your opinion on. That's my analysis. I hope I was able to adequately explain my reasons for why I think the dream interpretation makes the most sense. If my interpretation is correct, I think this film captures what a dream is like more accurately and elegantly than any film before it. Regardless, this was an amazing film with a fantastic script, and part of its strength is that it leaves you wondering and hungering for more. Do you agree with my interpretation? What do you think actually happened? If you've made it this far, thank you so much for listening. I know this was a long one. Please subscribe if you want to hear more reviews and analyses. I really appreciate it. Thank you for watching. Frank is about an aspiring songwriter named John and what happens when he joins this band, led by Frank, who's a very talented but kind of mysterious musician.